Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Cohen, the author of An Introduction to the Art and Science of Chinese Tea Ceremony. Today, we're doing the second bonus episode from our post-trip report. This was the 2023 spring tea technique research trip. In the last bonus episode, we discussed Yixing, and in this episode, we are discussing our time in Chaozhou. Here to join me for this episode is Patrick Penny.
What's up?
And Zongzun Li.
大家好，大家好。
Pat, Zongjun, what did you think of Chaozhou? What did you think of dancong tea? Let's start in the opposite way. What did you know about Chaozhou and dancong before we went there? Let's start with you, Pat.
Yeah, it's good to start with me because the answer is...
Welcome to my hometown, guys.
Exactly. The answer was not much. I knew Chaozhou was famous for good food, and, my expectations were met and blown away. And as far as dancong goes, I think I have a pretty introductory understanding of what the tea processing is like, what the environment looks like, some of the famous kind of named teas, and some of the flavor profiles, right? I've drank a good amount of dancong, but I was completely blown away when we were there. All my expectations were met and exceeded.
Well, we share a bit of history on this because the Tea Institute of Penn State didn't do a lot with dancong. It was always overshadowed by Wuyi tea. We talked a lot about yancha. We tasted a lot of great yancha. We had better sources for yancha. And, maybe we had a couple of dancongs over time, certainly been to places where they enjoyed dancong and we shared great dancong and I appreciated it. But it was never a region that we were seriously focused in sourcing on.
No, I definitely think it got ignored for a lot of the other, maybe at the time, right? We're talking about 2010 to 2015 teas that were getting hypey around those times. So, Young Sheng from Western facing producers was really, really hypey. And same thing for, as you were saying, Yancha, I think was just starting to kick up in the Western market. And as we've seen over the last 5 years now, it's kind of hit peak hype. And dancong is still a little under the radar, I feel like.
It's really the same story in China too, in the domestic market. Dancong is really a long forgotten and less recognized region and tea category.
It makes sense though. Dancong is much harder to source and appreciate, and it takes a bit more skill to brew, even versus Wuyi tea. Wuyi tea, there's a single harvest. The harvest gets blended across multiple days. It goes through the heavy roasting process, and it's expensive, it's rarefied. But, if you get Nuro, right, or if you get a great Lao Cong Suixian from Wuyi, you have a vague idea of what to expect, and you can judge whether it's going to match that flavor profile. But dancong going on single trees, single bushes, split across harvest days, they don't blend across days. I found it much harder to source and understand and build up a sensory memory of what indicated quality and what doesn't indicate quality.
Right. I think knowing exactly what you're getting is very difficult when it comes to dancong, particularly because of that harvest date that you had mentioned. When we were there on a day that the weather was basically perfect. And we were told that tomorrow's tea is not going to be so good because there's rain in the forecast. And I mean, you guys were there. I was leaving the next day. I don't know if it actually rained. But, how would you know if you're not there? If you're buying tea from a merchant and it says April 29th, how were you supposed to know that? Oh, actually, that wasn't the best day to get tea from.
AccuWeather. Our first product plug. AccuWeather.
Sponsored by.
Dancong.
Definitely.
But I agree. Even as we were asking, right, like our kind of mentors and educators and friends in the market, there was just a totally different framework that they were approaching dancong with than anything that I had ever heard in kind of Western tea education circles.
Let's circle back to that in a moment. But Zongjun, same question to you. What did you know about Chaozhou? What did you know about dancong tea before we went?
I was born in Guangzhou and, Canton at large, I consider as my hometown, my home base. Chaozhou is really a place that Guangzhou people will go for its food. So it's a flavorful place, man. Like different kind of culinary experience, including the tea, is something that many people would pursue even within the Canton region. I went there a couple times when I was a kid. I actually never gone back since I grown up. So it's really my first time exposure to Chaozhou as an adult. And definitely gave me, I would say, equivalent amount of shock as you guys did when I was in Chaozhou. It's just the intensity of tea culture. I will use intensity to measure tea culture. Its presence in Chaozhou is just, I've never seen this kind of intensity elsewhere, even in Yunnan, I would say.
Yeah, that blew me away. If we were going to talk about the trip chronologically, right? Like day one, really night one, we get in at like 11 o'clock. Basically, we're starting to walk around the old town at 11 o'clock. And people still have their tea sets out. People are still drinking tea on the streets. Tons of people in their shops drinking tea. And I was blown away by that. And as we kept going on day by day, we just saw more and more of it as we were out in the daytime, just everywhere. People drinking literally small mountains of tea in their gaiwan or teapot, drinking really strong dancong tea.
Yeah, and it's not just like another tea city or, tea marketplace that you can see in other places in China. People are doing proper gongfu in the street, and it's really like part of their lifestyle.
With charcoal.
With charcoal stove.
Full on
it's really amazing.
and braziers in the street, and people going up to other people's tables and sharing tea. It was, and we're not talking about sloppy, splashy fun time brewing. We're talking about full on Chaozhou gongfu, just random people in the streets on set up tables. I would say, so moving on to that second part of the first question, what we were there, what did we think? I was astounded. Chaozhou was so far beyond my wildest expectations. And even the not great tea, even the peripherally cultural restaurant tea, right? Not going to a cha ren place, a place specializing tea, just going to a normal place. The dancong tasted good. I don't know.
Yeah, we had breakfast for what, like probably $2 a person, $3 a person, just delicious chung fun. And a dancong of some sort hit the table, and it was very, very drinkable. Actually, I would say it was decent. It was good tea.
Yeah, I don't know the last time I've been in China and been to a random restaurant and put down a big metal pot of tea, and we're like, this is good. I'm gonna take a second glass of this.
And by Western standards, this was not like a restaurant. This was like a hole in the wall by Western standards, right? And I mean, the food was amazing, but the tea was really good for what we were paying for our dishes.
The place was also filled with steam. It was steaming chongfan, and the steam just went everywhere. And so
we were being steamed.
Yeah. We're sitting like
it was
80 plus degree weather in a steam room, eating chongfan, drinking down.
You have these steam trays of chongfan and different metal fans rolling around. It's really like a Miyazaki movie scene coming to reality.
And it was amazing.
It was amazing. I think we're all in agreement. Chaozhou, the food was amazing. The tea was amazing. It was astounding. From here, we can keep on this topic. I don't know how much everyone wants to listen to say.
I think maybe a fun topic to kind of continue on here is the brewing. So all of us, I think we practice very serious gongfu for quite some time now. But I think all of us have found dancong to be one of those touch and go teas where we think we figure it out, and then you switch to a different named dancong, and you don't know anymore. And while we were there, I think we saw a very consistent style of brewing from high-level practitioners that now that I've come back to the US, I've been trying to employ to pretty good results, actually. So I don't know if either of you have been doing any experimentation since you've returned based on what you observed when you were there.
Well, I'm certainly updosing now. The level of dosing that they were using in Chaozhou was far beyond what I had previously experienced with Chaozhou Gongfu. And, in fact, actually, so we've been writing the Yixing book. What led me to start writing the Yixing book is I wanted to write a book on Wui tea and Chaozhou Gongfu for Wui tea. And I had been doing some Chaozhou Gongfu for Wui tea. I have a tiny 45, 50 milliliter teapot, putting 3.5, 4 grams of tea in it. You consider that a packed pot. They were putting 9 grams, 10 grams, in some cases 12 grams of tea in a less than
dust
gaiwan. And
at 11 p.m.
At 11 p.m. We were just drinking tea for hours, and we were drinking incredibly highly updosed tea, both in gaiwans and in shantou teapots. What was amazing was you knew immediately when the tea was good tea or when we had moved to a lesser tea or we were sampling something that wasn't of the same standard. Putting 10 plus grams of tea into a teapot or into a gaiwan you can taste the flaws. You can taste whether that tea is of standard.
Oh, yeah. Is there any tea that we drank that really stands out to you just from an intensity standpoint?
So our friend at Chaozhou introduced us to a very interesting Lao Shi. He's one of the former scholar employed by the local forestry department, which was tasked on a first ever documentation of all Laocong, old bushes, old arbor, dancong tea bushes in Chaozhou region. So at the time, I think it was in the 90s, he had crazy access to incredibly large inventory of different kinds of old arbor, old bushes, and tea made from different regions and different time. So we had the fortune to have tea with this old gentleman and our friend for a couple of times. And every time he will bring a little backpack filled with little tiny canisters that are packed with different tea samples from different ages. And I think we are all thinking about the same tea that we first tried from him, is a tea that's actually not Camellia sinensis. I think it's Camellia notata. I don't necessarily remember.
Yeah, I remember getting a note on some of them. One of them was a Camellia caudata wall. I don't remember if that was the Gao Lu.
Caudata, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So he thought that it's most likely to be a closest reference of a tea called Gao Lu that was documented in Chajing. So we had that tea, and it was incredible. I think he only dosed it for like a few leaves. I think less than 2 grams.
Into 3 leaves.
It was less than a gram. Less than a gram.
Yeah, into the teapot. And the soup come out from the teapot was like almost clear, transparent. And it was so intense. It was so intense. It has a hard to describe kind of intensity of strong herbaceous notes that I think that was a very, very high starting point of our tea journey with Yang Lao Shi.
I think something that was so interesting is we were going from 10-gram packed Chaozhou style brewing, which was amazing, and the teas were really, really great, to this just strange sample of Gao Lu that we went from 10 grams to maybe 0.7 grams. And the qi on this tea was such a ride. I mean, it really wasn't the flavor for me. This tea like really felt like a trip within seconds. It was so intense. It's very hard to describe, particularly for how little tea was used.
It certainly put me in the zone. I enjoyed the flavor. I thought of it as it tasted to me like clarified kuwa juice in a good way.
Yeah. I was talking to our friend that this really reminds me of a type of TCM. It's called sanqi and tianqi. For those of you who have the correct reference, it really tastes like that. And also kugua juice.
Was there a more traditional dancong tea that really stood out to you?
I think the Laocong Rogui, one of the first samples that we had, that's one that I'm certainly purchasing as well.
That one had more of a wui profile, a much more mineral, deep profile, and more of a pronounced roast than a lot of the more fragrant dancongs. What do you think of the opinion that we heard in Chaozhou about the mineral type versus the fragrant type?
From my personal standpoint, I think the line is actually pretty clear between high fragrance approach and the what they call the Laocong approach. And the preference is also very different. For a lot of you who had dancong before and familiar with the community, people often call dancong the perfume of tea, the fragrance of tea, 茶中香水. So a very mainstream preference to dancong is the fragrance, like different type of fragrance, different type of perfumey note that you can pick up is sometimes the sole pursuit of liking or disliking a type of dancong. But it's a very different story when it comes to Laocong, the old bushes. When it comes to Laocong, it's not about the fragrance. People would talk about minerality. People would talk about what they often call 树林味, the forest notes, the forest flavor, which is, I think, shockingly similar to a lot of preference in Wuyi and also Pu'er. I think it's quite interesting. One other thing that's interesting is to see the generation or age gap between these two groups, these two different types of dancong preference.
One thing that was interesting is a lot of the more skilled dancong Chouzhou Gongfu practitioners are not super, they don't love that dancong is right now being predominantly represented by Yashi and Milan Xiang. There was an interesting conversation about how those teas tend to be grown at lower altitudes. They tend to be multiply roasted to further accentuate the aroma, but they don't have the same kind of depth and skill in production, and they don't last as long as the other teas. And that's interesting because, I mean, those are two of the predominant cultivars, two of the predominant flavor types that we see, I think, both in China and in the Western world.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think we got exposed to quite a few different cultivars that I was unfamiliar with. Baxian, Gongxian, there were a few that, I'd never heard of. And there were some that, when we were drinking with friends, were just named after local areas because they had no clue what the tree's real origins were from a named bush standpoint. There was just some that were super interesting.
Yeah, xiangfanshu, like fragrant sweet potato. That's the name of a single tree that they will harvest and turn that into tea.
Let's talk a little bit about our second day, where we actually went to Wudong Mountain. I've been to a lot of tea farms, a lot of tea producing areas, and Wudong was quite different. It was different because it was both very small and a big mountain, but the road is hugging it, and the tea lines the upper parts of the mountain. It was unique because the tea processing is taking place right at the farm level. There's very little separation on the original green leaf processing. And it was different because the entire mountain smelled like dancong. It was, I'm used to tea smelling, raw tea, green tea leaves smelling like spinach, maybe wasabi spinach or horseradish spinach, but having a very vegetal flavor. Dancong tea in its raw form smelled like dancong. It was otherworldly to be on a mountain with hundreds of pickers picking tea, carrying it down to the processing facility being hugging the road on narrow mountain roads, and the entire mountain smelling like dancong. That is something that will stick with me, I think, forever.
Most people were withering on one half of the road. So as we were driving, I mean, most of the time, half the road wasn't even usable because you've just got tarps out for withering, because there's just nowhere else to do it, because this is literally on a steep mountainside.
It's pretty amazing to see that happen in front of you. And Fenghuang Mountain is beautiful. The terroir, when you drink tea, you are really drinking the terroir, you're really drinking the flavor of where it was grown. I think it was never can be so true when that happens in front of you. Like Fenghuang is so beautiful, and so is Dantong.
We've all been, I think, to many tea mountains. This one certainly takes a special place in my heart. There was a very different feel to it. And I think one thing that really stood out to all of us was we had all heard, dancong, single trees. I think we all knew that they were larger trees. I think still just the sheer size of a lot of these trees, actually just how many large trees there were, really blew all of us away. And particularly me, like I went up to a bunch of trees. These are trunks that are too big to wrap your hands around, and they go on as far as the eye can see. There's really a lot of huge trees, in these gardens, which I think my mental image, even though I've seen pictures, my mental image of Fenghuang was very different than what I saw when we were there. And I'm happy about how much better it was than I thought it could even be.
Yeah. I mean, you are even using the word tree, but dancong means single bush, but it's really trees.
Oh, it's really a tree. That's what I was going to say. Zongjun and I went to Yunnan right after, which also has the old trees. But the trees, I don't know why they call the trees in Yunnan the big trees, because the trees that we saw in Wudong were bigger than any of the Yunnan trees. Those trees were just massive. 12 women standing in the tree, a single tree producing 10 kilos of tea, like just unbelievable. The size and scale of it, and how much space there is between the trees. This isn't a heavily planted plantation, or it's not even a heavily planted farm. You have a tea tree, and then sometimes you have some cabbage growing next to it for the farmer family.
In fact, it really doesn't feel like a plantation, right? It feels like a forest. And it just happens to be that most of that forest is tea.
Yeah, it's ancient arbor. I'll put that in quotes. It's certainly a human sculpted landscape, but it's not an intensive agricultural landscape. And the overall yields, the overall production volumes are very low.
How about all the maocha that we all drank? How are your stomachs all feeling?
I've had 2.5 weeks to recover.
And you still haven't.
For those of you listening, there's a very strange way that dancong is sourced. You actually taste the leaves in their semi-raw form, either right after withering in the first tumble dry, or you reach into the hot tumble dry or hot shaching roller and you taste the unfinished shaching tea. And our first experience with this was, okay, this is tea, we're going to drink it. And you very quickly learn not to do that.
We're going to drink this tea, but don't really drink that much of this tea. Trust me, you don't want to.
Maybe also consider spitting, because it is harsh stuff. And it doesn't taste like the finished product tastes, of course, both because it's not fully finished drying and also because it hasn't been roasted at all. But at the same time, they're still brewing like 5 or 6 or 10 grams of this in super concentrate. It's very green. It's very bitter. And it took us, I would say like 20 tastings, tasting 20 teas before we were even able to start picking up differences and understanding what they were looking for when they were sourcing.
Yeah, we're certainly still amateurs.
Yeah, I think we just came in a slightly wrong mentality in the first place, because we were trying to understand maocha in a mindset of drinking, regular tea, but it's really not what they're trying to do. The standard of discerning the quality of maocha is very different from the finished product that we are drinking.
There was a lot of discussion of shui lu. Zongjun, do you want to describe a little bit about, how we were hearing maocha discussed in those terms?
The literal translation will be water path. It's basically the process of clearing out the moisture content from the fresh tea leaf. So with a very high quality shui lu, you end up having a very clean and not grassy tasting and not watery tasting tea at the end. But it's really about, how clear the moisture content being clear out from the tea leaf, resulting in the final product.
We're almost at the end of this episode, but before we go, I want to ask if anyone has one additional tea experience, one additional culinary experience they want to share.
I think we do need to name like each of our favorite foods from the trip before we finish. But just the last tea experience that I'll share, we had the opportunity to visit a pretty famous local Chaozhou potter. We were drinking tea with him in his studio. He was an amazing, super humble guy. And by that point in the trip, we had just been surrounded by people drinking strong, strong tea and smoking cigarettes, because that is like what is just happening in Chaozhou. And I think Zongjun and I, we got to the point where we were surrounded by tea and cigarettes the whole time. And Zongjun's a cool guy, and he just broke out the cigars. And I was like, you know what? This is what we're doing. So we got to have tea and cigars with a pretty well-renowned potter. And you know what?
Pairing.
Yeah, dancong and cigars, really great pairing. And it was just an amazing experience. We got to learn a ton about the making of Chaozhou clay pots. We got to learn a lot about the clay itself, and the potter was just the most amazing, humble, and knowledgeable guy you could ever want to meet. I definitely wish we had time to go grab a beer or something with him too. Jason stayed a purist. We were trying to get the authentic Chaozhou experience.
Got enough secondhand smoke.
Dude, everyone is a smoker in Chaozhou. That's something that you had to experience. But I respect your decision, Jason.
The one other tea experience that I'll mention is also on the Chaozhou teapots. I've always had a lot of trouble using Chaozhou teapots and figuring out when and how to use them. But the thinness of the wares that they were using in Chaozhou and their understanding of how to use the wares, and even the discussions that we have that were relatively rarefied discussions to have at that level over the use of shadiao versus tetsubing, and the flavor imparted by cast iron versus the flavor imparted by a stone boiler, and the lightness of the water and where the sweetness comes from. That's a pretty esoteric knowledge, even in Charen level. And using these super, super thin Chaozhou teapots to brew very delicate, very fragrant tea, and still having them come out light-bodied and full of fragrance. That was a new experience for someone writing a lot about teapots.
Definitely. That's what they say, 水过沙则甜. When the water passes through the mineral, the grains, it will turn sweet. I think that was very true to experience that in person. For me, I would say just having tea with our friend and with Yang Laoshi was probably my most memorable experience drinking tea in Chaozhou. There was just so much that I learned and so much intensity of dancong in your mouth, in your mind, in your stomach, and so much smoke, both from the cigarette and also from the charcoal in the nilu. It was amazing. It was otherworldly phenomenal.
And it was fueling all of Zongjun's translations. So, thank you, Zongjun, for all the translation work when we were there.
No problem.
I would live in Chaozhou. If I was going
to. We all talked about that pretty quickly. I was like, yeah, retirement in Chaozhou, not bad.
not bad. Rapid fire.
Favorite food to close us out?
Zongjun, starting with you.
This is a really hard decision to make, but I would say the raw marinade, shengyan. Very good.
You took it right out of my mouth. This is the only time I've ever eaten raw seafood in China, and I did not get sick, and it tasted amazing. Highly recommended.
Let's just mention that this wasn't like raw fish. This was raw crustaceans, clams, shellfish. That was a new experience for me too. It was not my top, although it was amazing. I did have to travel the next day, which was a bad idea. I think the beef ball soup was actually my favorite. We had so many good dishes. It's so hard to decide one, but the beef balls were really, really great.
That's a classic. I would take what is it? Zongzun Li, the boiled chicken.
Oh, Lu Shui
over the beef balls.
Yeah, I mean, I eat Lu Shui when I was a kid, and this is really my hometown food. But nothing wrong with that. I love Lu Shui so much. Actually, I just ate Lu Shui yesterday.
All foodies, I think, need to make a trip to Chaozhou. It was definitely a special place.
If you ever eat Lu Shui at Chaozhou, you have to try the Chinese fugua, the Chaozhou fugua. The liver is very good.
Well, everyone, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you for joining us in this edition of Tea Technique Editorial Conversations. Please join us again for the last and final bonus episode on pu'er tea in Yunnan, followed by the resumption of our regularly scheduled programming on Book 2, Yixing Teapots.